My wife divorced me when she became a doctor. 3 years later, she came back begging when they withdrew her certificate. My revenge. My name is Billion Derek. I am not a man who tells stories easily. I was raised by a woman who believed that silence was a form of dignity, that the less you said about your pain, the less power it had over you. My mother died of a kidney disease we couldn't afford to treat, and she never once complained loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I inherited that from her. The quiet, the stillness, the habit of folding things inward instead of letting them spill. But this story needs to be told. Not because I want sympathy, not because I need anyone to take my side, but because there is a version of this that the world will hear from the wrong mouth, with the wrong details, framed to make the one who left look like the one who was simply brave enough to go. I was there. I know what happened, and I am the only one who can tell it from the inside. So I will tell it. All of it. Starting from the Saturday morning the eggs burned. I had been making those eggs for 4 years, every Saturday. The same way. 2 eggs, a little butter, low heat, the way Saitana told me she liked them the first time I ever cooked for her. She had been sitting at our small kitchen table with a pharmacology textbook open in front of her, and I had slid the plate toward her without announcement, and she had looked up and said, "These are perfect." I don't think she was talking only about the eggs. I think we were both, in that moment, talking about something larger, about the life we were quietly assembling together, piece by careful piece. I was 23 when I met Saitana. She was sitting on the steps of a community library with a medical textbook too heavy for her bag, her shoes held together with rubber bands, underlining pages with a pen that kept running dry. I sat beside her without being invited, and when her pen gave out mid-sentence, I handed her mine without a word. She looked up. I didn't look away. That was the entire beginning of it. A borrowed pen, a shared step, and 2 people who didn't yet know what they were starting. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. The ring was silver with a small blue stone, bought in 4 installments from a jeweler on Rumola Road who never once made me feel small for paying in parts. She cried when I gave it to her. I was certain, that those were the happiest tears I would ever cause her. I was wrong. The worst tears I ever caused her were the ones I didn't even witness, because by the time she shed them, I had already walked out of the room. But that comes later. On the Saturday morning the eggs burned, Saitana walked into the kitchen wearing her white coat. She had received her medical license 3 days before. She had taken photographs of it. She had posted them. Her colleagues had celebrated her. Her supervisor had called her a natural. I had cooked her favorite meal the night she came home with it, dimmed the lights, and placed a card on the table. The card said, "You did it. We did it." She had smiled at that card and said nothing about what was already sitting in her bag. I didn't know about what was in her bag. I was standing at the stove, low heat, 2 eggs, a little butter, thinking about nothing except the morning. She placed the envelope beside the pan. I looked at it, then at her. Her expression was arranged, the way faces arrange themselves when the decision has already been made, and what remains is only the delivery. "What's this?" I asked. "I think you should read it," she said. I opened it with one hand, the spatula still in the other. The word petition was in the header. I saw the date stamp. I read the date stamp again. 3 days prior, the same week her certificate was issued. The eggs started to burn. I turned off the gas, set the spatula down on the counter with a precision that surprised even me. I read the document twice, not because I didn't understand it the first time, because I needed my body to catch up with my mind, and my body was moving very slowly that morning. When I looked up, she was still standing there, composed, clinical. Her hands were clasped in front of her the way doctors clasp their hands when they are delivering news they have already emotionally processed in private. "You filed this Thursday," I said, "the same day you got your license." "Billion, the same day." I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that. I did not break anything or move toward her or perform any of the things grief is supposed to look like from the outside. I folded the document, placed it back in the envelope, held it out to her. "Keep it," I said. "I won't fight you." I walked out of the kitchen, down the hallway, into the bedroom. I closed the door. Not slammed, closed, quietly. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the floor and thought about my mother, about how she had gone quietly too, how she had never once asked the disease to be fair. And I thought about the ring I had bought in 4 installments, and I thought about the pen I had lent a girl on a library step, and how that single small act of generosity had led me here, to this bed, to this silence, to this particular quality of morning that smelled like burnt eggs, and the end of something I had given everything to build. I sat there for a long time. I did not cry. Not yet. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. 3 weeks after Saitana filed, her lawyer called mine. Mrs. Eferibo, a compact, unhurried woman who chose her words the way surgeons choose instruments, called me afterward with a message. Saitana's lawyer had passed along Saitana's answer to the question I had asked before signing. The question was simple. Was she leaving because she was unhappy, or because staying would make her feel small? She had paused for 4 seconds before answering. Mrs. Eferibo counted them. Then Saitana said she was leaving because she had grown. Mrs. Eferibo sent me a voice note after. She said, "She paused 4 seconds. She knows." I listened to that voice note once, standing in my warehouse between 2 cold storage units, the refrigeration hum filling the silence around me. Then I deleted it. I signed everything. Asked for nothing, not the land, not the account, not a single piece of furniture from the apartment I had furnished in installments, the same way I had furnished everything in that life, slowly, carefully, in parts. The divorce was finalized 11 days later. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 2 lists. One of everything I had lost, one of everything I still had. The second list was longer. I started reading the second list very carefully. 14 months after the divorce, I sponsored a medical conference. It was not a performance. My company was supplying cold chain pharmaceutical logistics to 14 hospitals by then, and the conference, Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Innovation in Sub-Saharan Africa, was a legitimate industry event where my presence made business sense. I had 41 trucks by that point, a government contract, a cold storage warehouse outside Rumuokoro. I had built it the way I built everything, without announcing it, without performing it for an audience, just one decision after another until the structure was real enough to walk into. I did not know Saitana would be on the panel until the morning of the event. When I saw her name in the booklet, something in my chest moved. Not grief, not triumph, something quieter than both. I was near the sponsor table when she saw me. I watched her read my company name in the booklet. I watched her read it again. I nodded when her eyes found mine, the way you'd nod at a professional you respected. Then I returned to my conversation with the deputy director. A colleague leaned to her during the break. I didn't hear what he said. I didn't need to. I already knew what my presence in that room was saying without a single word from me. The letter from the Medical and Dental Council arrived on a Monday morning. I know this because Saitana's lawyer called Mrs. Eferibo the same week, not to discuss it directly, but to ask whether I would be willing to make a quiet call on Saitana's behalf. The voicemail was careful and professional. It acknowledged my relationships with hospital administrators. It used phrases like, remind people of her character, and not to interfere, simply to speak. I listened to it twice, standing in my home office with the door closed. Then I called Mrs. Eferibo back. I told her I would not make calls to protect people from consequences rooted in patient safety. I told her to instruct Saitana's lawyer to stop calling. Then I hung up and returned to my logistics spreadsheet. Chukwudera walked in minutes later with a schoolbook and asked for help with fractions. I closed the spreadsheet immediately. He was 10 years old and had been living with me for 2 years by then. Quietly, steadily, the way children absorb stability when you offer it consistently. I had never planned to tell Saitana about him. Not out of secrecy, simply because some things you build are yours alone, and they don't owe their existence to the people who left. I need to tell you about Chukwudera properly, because he matters more than this story has yet shown. He was 7 when he first appeared at my fence, the son of a neighbor who had abandoned their home, leaving the boy with an elderly grandmother too ill to manage school fees or meals or the specific loneliness of a child who has been left behind by someone who should have stayed. He would come after school and sit by the fence watching me work in the yard. I started leaving food near the gate. Then I started talking to him through the fence. Then, after 6 weeks of that, I started letting him in. This happened during the months after the miscarriage. The pregnancy Saitana and I lost at 11 weeks, the one she handled by returning to her studies within the week and never speaking about again. I cried alone about that. I held the grief privately, the way my mother taught me to hold things. And then this boy appeared at my fence, and something in me that had nowhere to go found somewhere to go. By the time Saitana left, I had been quietly covering his school fees for 2 years. After she left, I became his legal guardian. He called me Uncle B. He still does. The night Saitana came to my gate, it was raining. I was in my home office reviewing the Q3 supply projections when the intercom buzzed. Mama Stella answered and appeared in my doorway with an expression too careful to be neutral. She said a woman named Saitana was at the gate. I told her I was aware. I walked to the front window and looked out. Saitana was standing in the rain without moving toward shelter, just standing, the way people stand when they feel they deserve the weather falling on them. I told Mama Stella to open the gate. I watched Saitana walk up the path soaking, thinner than I remembered, the armor gone. All that clinical confidence she had worn the last time I saw her, at the conference, at the divorce, had been stripped away by something I was only beginning to understand the full shape of. She reached the front door. It opened before she knocked. Chukwudera stood in the doorway in his pajamas, a book under his arm, looking up at her with the calm honesty of a child who has learned the basic facts of the house he lives in. He said, "Are you the woman who left Uncle B?" She started crying before she even crossed the threshold. I watched from the upstairs monitor for 20 minutes before going down. I had a 2-camera system, gate and living room, installed 18 months prior during a contract dispute that had briefly escalated. I watched Saitana sit on the sofa and clasp and unclasp her hands. I watched Mama Stella bring her a towel and tea she didn't drink. I watched Chukwudera return on his own and sit beside her with his book open, not because I asked him to, but because he had the instinct children sometimes have for wounded things. I watched her look around the room, at the logistics award on the wall, at the built-in shelves, at a framed photograph she couldn't see clearly from where she sat. The photograph was of me and my mother, taken when I was 16, 2 years before she died. Saitana didn't know that. She sat in my living room surrounded by evidence of the life I had built entirely after she left, and I watched her absorb it slowly. After 20 minutes, I stood up, straightened my shirt, and walked downstairs. I did not rehearse what I would say. I had learned from years of logistics that the best preparation is simply knowing what you are not willing to compromise. Everything else is just conversation. She stood when she heard my footsteps. She turned and said my name, just my name, stripped of everything except the single syllable of it, billion, the way you say a word when the full sentence is too heavy to carry. I told her to sit. She sat. I sat across from her, not beside her. She began to apologize, and I stopped her before she finished the first sentence. I asked her if she remembered what my lawyer had asked before I signed, the question about whether she was leaving because she was unhappy or because staying would make her feel small. I watched her face move through several expressions quickly before settling into stillness. I told her she had answered that she was leaving because she had grown. Then I asked her which version of Saitana was sitting in my living room right now. The silence lasted a long time. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said, "The one who was wrong." Chukwudera turned a page in his book from across the room. The sound was very small and very loud at the same time. I looked at this woman I had built a life around and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not vindication, sorrow. Clean, quiet sorrow for what we had both lost. She laid out the case against her with clinical precision. The 2 incidents, the council investigation, Nurse Obiageli's testimony, the suspension, the impending withdrawal. She explained Fabian and the fraudulent credit filings. She explained the depleted defense fund. Then she asked me to make a call. Not to lie, she said, just to speak for her character, just to remind people who she was. When she finished, I reached for the folder on the side table. She hadn't noticed it, and slid a document across the coffee table toward her. She picked it up. I watched her eyes move across the first paragraph, then faster, then stop entirely. It was a letter on my company letterhead, addressed to the council secretary, sent 3 weeks before she came to my gate. In it, I had voluntarily disclosed that 2 hospitals in my supply network had flagged documentation irregularities corresponding to her residency period. I had forwarded the information because it was relevant to a patient safety investigation, not to harm her, because it was honest. She looked up at me. "You already contacted them." I said yes. She asked why. I told her I built what I built so no one suffers because the wrong person has access to patients. "Not even you," I said. The room held that sentence for a long moment. She stood up when the grief converted into something with posture. She said I had the power to help her and chose not to. I told her I had the power to protect patients, and that was different. She said I was choosing principles over her. I let her finish. Then I said 7 words. "You chose your certificate over me first." She sat back down. Not in defeat, in the particular collapse of someone whose own logic has just been returned to them with precision. The room was very quiet. Chukwudra appeared in the doorway and said dinner was getting cold. I stood up and told Saitana she could stay and that afterward we could talk about what would actually help her. Not what she had wanted from me tonight, but what might genuinely work. I walked toward the dining room. I didn't look back to see if she followed. I heard her footsteps behind me a moment later. We ate without resolving anything. Chukwudera sat between us and talked about a fraction problem he had solved correctly that afternoon and couldn't stop being proud of. Saitana listened to him with an expression I recognized, the same expression she used to wear at that library step, before she became afraid of where she came from. I did not call the council. I did not leverage a relationship or whisper into any administrator's ear. What I did was hire her the best medical defense attorney in the region, Bar Tobena Achiki, who had successfully defended 3 doctors in similar proceedings. I paid the retainer in full and attached a note. Not a favor. A loan. Pay me back when you're practicing again. I also reached out, through Mrs. Eferibo, to Nurse Obiagali Tansi, not to pressure her, simply to ask whether her account was complete, whether undisclosed documentation existed that reflected the full clinical picture. Obiagali, who was honest in every direction, shared additional pages from her clinical notebook. They showed that Saitana's initial call had been made with incomplete information, not gross negligence, and that her later modification had partially incorporated junior staff input, undocumented but auditable. The council reclassified the finding from gross negligence to procedural oversight. The ruling was an 8-month suspension with mandatory retraining, not withdrawal. Suspension. When Saitana's lawyer told her who had arranged the inquiry, she went silent on the phone. She didn't call me that day. She sat with it. I understood that. Grace from the person you've wronged doesn't arrive gently. It arrives like a door opened from the inside, the kind you forgot you had a key to. She came back 3 months into the suspension. No rain this time. Clear afternoon. Honest light. Mama Stella opened the gate, and Chukwudera ran past her shouting Auntie Sai like he had known her for years, because in his mind, she existed in the house the way the photograph of my mother existed, as someone real who simply hadn't been present yet. He told her I was in the garden. I was under the neem tree reviewing paperwork when she sat across from me and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a cashier's check, the first installment of the retainer repayment earned from medical training consultancy work she had taken on during the suspension. Beneath the check was a single handwritten page. Not an apology. She had already given that. Not a proposal. A record. Every semester. Every payment. She had tracked them through old bank statements and school financial records and added everything up. At the bottom, in her handwriting, she had written that she was not paying me back because she owed me, but because she wanted to become someone I didn't have to carry. Whether it meant anything to me or not, she wanted to finish what was started. Right. I folded the letter and slid it into my folder. Then I pulled a second chair to the table. I didn't ask her to stay. I just made room. She understood.